Here we go. Welcome to DrugsCo, everyone. I know I say this every time, but there are lots of things that I was supposed to do for this lecture that I didn't do beforehand. And my rationale is that I'm tired and it's a pandemic. And it's hard to spend that many hours a day on the screen when I already do it for work. So I am going to have to do a lot of verbal explaining of stuff that I would love to have on the slides, but that will eventually be on the slides when the sun is shining once more. We understand. That's funny. Okay, so today we're talking about MDMA and MDMA type drugs, which is so exciting to me because this means that we are segueing into the category of substances that people really, really, really don't understand. Or like, it's just one of those things where Molly and Molly type drugs are used so casually, especially like shout out to my rave community in here. Give me a little thumbs up if you're in the rave community. If you are here today. Okay, I see some ravers in here. That's nice. Okay, we like that. So, for all my ravers out here, I'm sure that seeing someone go looks pretty familiar to you, at least to some degree, right? And, benzopurines, actually, well, we can talk about them separately. We can talk about those, the APBs. Okay, but before we do that, let's just move into this so we don't take 2 sessions to do this one again. Name some psychedelics, throw them out there. You can type them in the chat. You can say them out loud.
Mushrooms.
Mushrooms. DMT, mescaline, 2CB, 25IN boom, weed. Yeah, weed can be 2CI, 2CD, 2CC. That's just cheating. You can put any letter at the end of that. Shroom, Aleph, 4-HOMET, 4-HODIPT. Just like button mash that one. Like, let's come up with a research chemical right now. That is going to be, I just typed it in the chat. That's the newest upcoming synthetic cannabinoid. That's what I've decided. HXE, yeah, 2CB. I knew that was going to happen. I was about to say, time for you guys to flex on all your research chemicals. So we're just looking at the classical ones right now. LSD, which somehow nobody said, I don't think. Mushrooms, mescaline-containing plants or the extract itself. And DMT, what are some elements of a difficult trip?
I don't know, I've never had.
Elements of a difficult trip? I just couldn't hear you.
Yeah, bad setting.
Bad environment, paranoia, fear, but spelled with a lot of spaces between it. Physical discomfort, thought loops, that's right. We'll come back to all this in trip sitting. I'm so excited about trip sitting because, like I've said before, I hate that fluffy trip sitting shit where it's just like, if someone's having a hard time, don't try and force their experience. And you're like, okay, well, this guy is like popping his joints out and his eyes are bugging out and I don't know what I should do. So we're going to get concrete with that. So looping, like going over the same thought over and over again. Body harm fear is really common. Is my brain coming out of my nose? Am I bleeding? I can't tell if I'm bleeding. Am I okay? Like, where do I start? And this piece of bread ends. Fear, yeah, that's basic. And psychosis, loss of lucidity, loss of touch with reality. There's a ton of different stuff. We'll come back to that. That's just scratching the surface. What neurotransmitter do classical psychedelics act on? And what specific receptor do classical psychedelics act on? Yes, I see 5-HT.
Serotonin.
Yes, that's right. So they act on serotonin, and within that, the specific receptor is the 5-HT2A receptor. And there's a whole bunch of types of serotonin receptor, but oftentimes if something acts on the 5-HT2A receptor specifically, it will have hallucinogenic effects. And yes, most of your serotonin receptors are in your gut. So that's why you get really nauseous and sometimes feel like you need to shit immediately after you start coming up on MDMA. Thumbs up if that's ever happened to you. All right. What is the likelihood of becoming dependent on psychedelics? 1. Okay, out of 10. I like the metric that you've created. Yes, very unlikely. The likelihood of developing physical dependence on psychedelics is like, you're just probably not going to. Psychological dependence, which is not the same thing as addiction, which we'll come back to in more detail later. Please mute yourself if you're not already muted. Otherwise, I'll have to hunt you down and mute you. Hey, mute yourselves. Yeah, I knew it. Okay, what is an indicator that a tab may contain a potentially dangerous adulterant? I know these are pretty basic ones for a lot of you. Bitter, that's right. If it's bitter, it's a spitter. Strong, metallic, bitter taste is a pretty good indicator. And what are two things that start with an S that can impact a trip? It's a phrase, like two words that have been coined.
Set and setting.
Yes, set and setting, right. So again, I know that some of you have a lot of knowledge about drugs. Others of you are very new to this. So if you don't know all these off the top of your head, that is fine. Like I've said before, this is a much more knowledgeable group than I usually have in this class. Rest assured, I promise we're going to cover stuff that you've never heard of before. Just like, we'll get there. Okay, what is this image depicting? If you see me just like dragging my mouse all over the screen, it's because I'm moving the chat box around, not because I'm just like going to town. Yes, I see Bicycle Day. That's right.
Albert Hoffman.
Yes, that's right. Albert Hoffman was the guy that synthesized LSD in 1938. In 1943, he hops on his bicycle on April 14th and goes for a bike ride home. Yeah, 419, day before 420, littest weekend of all time. Now, in terms of psychotic disorders and mood disorders, there is a potential for there to act as a stressor that will bring out or exacerbate existing symptoms of these disorders. It is not guaranteed. It is not known the degree to which this acts as a stressor. It varies from person to person, but it's good to know for informed consent purposes that you should be mindful of this fact if you are predisposed. And then this is microdosing, taking small, and I do mean like sub-perceptual. You shouldn't feel high. You shouldn't feel the effects of this substance if you're actually dosing it as a microdose. So many people have come to me and been like, yo, I love microdosing, but like I can't do it before class because I just like can't focus and I get too high. And I'm like, how much did you take? And they say, oh, I took like a third of a tab. That's not a microdose. That's just a dose. It's a small dose, but it's a dose. So be aware of that fact. Microdosing is tiny quantities. And unless you know the person that laid the liquid on the blotter tab, you don't actually have any idea how much is on your tab. So we'll get back to volumetric dosing later. Volumetric dosing is a way that you can extract the material off of the tab and basically measure it out into individual drops. Mini dosing, that's cute. I like mini dosing. Yeah, most microdoses are 5 to 15 micrograms. Some people are so sensitive that anything above 5 micrograms is perceptual. So you have to kind of like figure it out for yourself. Nothing weirder than an actual accidental mini dose in class. Yes, I agree. Okay, so an empathogen is a class of substances or psychoactives specifically that creates emotional openness, interpersonal connection, and empathy. So if something is listed as being an empathogen or an intactogen, it means that it is an open heart bomb, or at least to some extent, it increases kind of like, oh, I hate to use this phrase, but it's like a love lubricant. Sorry, I had to do that to you. Yes, volumetric dose. So you can cut up your tab if you know how strong your tab is subjectively and you feel like doing that. Like if you're cutting up a tiny enough quantity of your tab, you're not at that high of a risk. Like, but we're talking you really need to do like the size of a pencil tip, like that small, okay? And you can work your way up from there, but if you're going to use the tab cutting method, especially if you're microdosing before something that is even remotely important, then you should be super, 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 super conservative. Volumetric dosing involves usually using ethanol and or distilled water. And you can kind of like, I'm not going to get into it right now because we'll get too sidetracked, but I can provide some additional information about volumetric dosing in the Discord, maybe if you're in it, or via email. So email me. Okay, so why do people use Molly? It's a good question. We see all these news publications talking about how Molly punches holes in your brains and how if you do Molly, you could just like spontaneously die or eruptively become pregnant. I don't know. That's just like the natural order of media speculation about substances. Most of the time people are doing Molly because it's fucking fun as hell, honestly. Like Molly is you go up a roller coaster really, really quickly, and then you just like explode with feeling lit. And that is like the really like it's the truth. Underdosing MDMA, on the other hand, is a pretty unpleasant and uncomfortable experience a lot of the time. Sorry, I'm going to go around and mute people if they're not already muted. Please mute yourself if you haven't. But a lot of the time, Molly is used as a social lubricant for people in especially party and rave settings. And the reason is that it gets really easy to make new friends immediately with everyone, even if you actually hate them. And that just happens a lot of the time. Okay, I'm going to have to go around and mute someone.
It's good.
Gonna
What
have-
is this?
I got to mute you.
You're cool, bro. Yeah.
Whoever's speaking right now, I'm in the process of hunting you down to mute you. Yeah, that's right. Oh my God, I couldn't find them. No. Okay. Anyway, so people use Molly for fun purposes. Now, more recently, we've been starting to see people using Molly for medical or therapeutic purposes, and we're going to come back to that super soon. No, actually, way later. That's a complete lie. We'll come back to that way later. Now, currently, the primary studies done on MDMA are looking at treating things like PTSD, which the treatment for PTSD currently is pretty dismal. Most people don't really see very many effects, and they suffer from it for decades. PTSD is a severely debilitating condition, especially for like these focuses of these studies are largely on veterans. That's like the main thing that we're looking at. But bitch should be looking at racial trauma, okay? That's a traumatic, lifelong experience for millions of people and a tragically understudied, underfunded, underlooked at portion of where we should be directing attention towards implementing these studies. And I have a lot to say on that subject. We'll come back to it in a little bit. I'm mad about it. So we'll look at how PTSD is influenced by this, but then there's also the issue of depression or anxiety. And this is one of those things where depression and anxiety kind of often go hand in hand for a lot of people, or they're talked about at the same time. And when it comes to Molly, it's a bit more complicated because acutely, like after you roll, a lot of people experience a pretty significant crash, come down a hangover, days or even weeks after, depending on the person's individual brain chemistry. You can't fully predict this for anyone, but I would say that if a person is predisposed to depressive episodes, especially major depressive disorder, then your likelihood of having a hard crash from Molly might be somewhat higher, but we don't have, to my knowledge, any concrete information about this yet. So keep that in mind. If you're not in a position to have that downswing afterwards and you've never done it and you're curious about it, you should know that like you need to prepare yourself for any outcome. And that's true with any substance. You should prepare yourself for like shit hits the fan. You should have a contingency plan in effect, but know that with Molly, it's not quite that simple. Now, most countries that love MDMA are white predominantly. Like this is just a thing with a lot of party substances, like classical recreational party drugs, is that we are the consumers. We drive the demand for the entire industry. And part of the reason I want to point this out is that when we start looking at the growers, the manufacturers, the chemists, we see a lot of demonization and xenophobia around the places and the people that are making these drugs. And it very much is like, it's a white moral panic hysteria kind of thing. I promise. And we'll come back to looking at exactly how that's happened, like opium dens with Chinese immigrants, marijuana with Mexican immigrants, looking at the black cocaine fiend propaganda that was released in the early 1900s. Like it's really very specifically racial. Like it's not even ambiguous. It's like specifically racial. So when you look at a map like this, that becomes even more immediately evident, right? Even just looking at something like MDMA. And granted, this was from like 7 years ago, but it's probably still approximately the same. Now, both MDMA and MDA, which are the two drugs we're going to talk about today, are Schedule 1 substances, and we'll look into some scandal about that. This is why I love talking about Molly so much, because the little known history of why this is such a scandalous substance just tickles me so much. Like, oh, this is like a Dr. Phil episode. There's intrigue, there's betrayal. Like, it was so exciting. All right. Okay, so MDMA is 3,4-methylene dioxymethamphetamine, and I want to point out that yes, you are reading that correctly. Methamphetamine is in the name for Molly. Now, a lot of people would read that and have one of two reactions. Their first reaction might be, oh my God, is Molly actually meth? And their second reaction might be, they already know that it's not the same thing. So I don't know why I said that. Yeah. MDMA is a phenethylamine, but it's like, we shouldn't get into that specific. Oh yeah, wait, it's meth with extras, right? Just because a substance has another substance's name in it doesn't mean that they're the same thing. Just because a substance is one molecule, or I'm sorry, one atom away from another substance doesn't mean that they're the same thing. Take, for example, H2O, water, the substance that we all know and love and are predominantly composed of. Now take H2O2, hydrogen peroxide. If you drink a lot of it, you'll probably die or be really, really ill and have to be carted to the hospitals. So, like, keep that in mind. And granted, those are tiny molecules. So if you make a little change to it, the change will be more drastic than a big molecule, which is how you get away with stuff like, for instance, the 4HO class. You have like 4HO-MET, 4HO-MIPT, and you're making little molecular changes that change the quality of the substance, but not like entirely, like the backbone of it remains the same. So I know that that's a bit out of scope for a lot of you chemistry-wise, but the point is, just because methamphetamine is in this name doesn't mean that Molly's actually meth. If your Molly's keeping you up for 12 hours and you're gurning your teeth a lot, it might just actually be that you have methamphetamine in your pill and not your Molly. Guys, please mute yourselves. Please. I'm begging you. Whoops. I just asked someone to unmute. Don't do it. It's a lie. It wasn't what I wanted. Thank you. I'm not trying to call anyone out, by the way. That's not my intention. Okay, so standard dose of MDMA is 80 to 150 milligrams. Now, dosing Molly, oh my God, I could talk about dosing Molly. And I will, because that's the entire point of this class. Dosing Molly is a very particular practice, and everyone's brain chemistry responds to it differently. So there are some people that can roll balls on 70 milligrams of MDMA, and some people that actually cannot roll unless they have at least like 180 in their system. However, the latter is extremely uncommon. If most people, I would say, need between 100 and 125 milligrams to roll on MDMA, unless you've been using it really consistently for a really long time or recently. And if you've been doing those things and you need more to roll, there's a pretty good chance that you've built a tolerance. Now, I know a lot of people that are like, yo, like I just started doing Molly and I'm taking like 2 points in a night at the same time and then re-upping with 2 more points. And the thing is that, like, realistically speaking, you would probably have plateaued effects-wise at a much lower dose than what you took. A lot of the time, you don't actually need to take that much Molly to roll. And when people start off rolling on too large of quantities, they think that that's the standard, basically. They're like, that's how much I need to roll. And we'll come back to exactly why that's probably not a good thing in a second. It has to do with toxicity and metabolites. But basically, like, you want to find the smallest quantity of any substance that can give you the desired effects. It's always a good idea to start with a lower dose of MDMA and work up or down by 5 milligrams at a time each time, and to space it adequately, even if it's a failed experiment and you don't roll the way that you want to. Just because you didn't get the effects that you wanted to doesn't mean it like doesn't count and you can just do it again immediately. I'm looking at some comments. Yeah, I would really say that most people should start with a dose of like 90 to 100 milligrams of MDMA. Like, I've seen people that have been so high that they couldn't get off the floor from 80 milligrams of actual good quality MDMA. So just, there's no point in overdoing it. Start low, go slow. I know it sounds basic, but like, no joke. Like, Molly's a serious drug. It's not baby things. It's like, it's really intense. It really changes your body temporarily. Now, a means of measuring this is 1 point is considered to be 100 milligrams of MDMA. Most people that have press pills have no idea how much is in their press pills because no one except the lab can identify how much is in a pressed pill. You can't just weigh it out. There's other stuff in it, like excipients, binders, whatever. Never once had a good time on MDMA. I'm sorry. That really sucks. We can talk about why potentially if you want later. Might be able to figure it out. So if someone says, I have a point of Molly, that means 100 milligrams, or it means that there's some crusty dude in a Grateful Dead cap at a rave that's just handed you 50 milligrams of MDMA and is claiming that it's a point, which happens a lot. Just some quick, if there's so much about Molly that we'll get to, like I'm trying to keep it moving, but like I'll stay after for this because there's so much about Molly. Gurning is involuntary jaw clenching, tooth grinding, otherwise known as bruxism, but gurning was like the classic term. If someone's gurning, they're like really chewing on it. And if someone's rolling hard enough, like especially if someone's MDMA naive and they take like 150 milligrams or more, you could probably see them like that. It gets kind of scary sometimes, but they're fine, most likely. If someone is rolling, it means that they're high on MDMA, if that's a new term for you. This is a girl at a Katy Perry show who came up and was rolling, and I think this gif is really funny. If someone is floored, it means that they are so high that they are on the ground or sitting down or can't move. This is another reason why taking a high quantity of MDMA is probably going to put your ass literally on the ground. Like you're just rolling with sensation for a couple hours. So not necessarily the most effective way to spend your money if you're at a festival, I would say, but it really depends on what you want, you know? It's being floored. And then there's nystagmus, which is eye wiggles. For those of you that are not familiar with what it looks like when someone's rolling hard, and usually like the harder you roll, the more your eyes wiggle to the point where it's really hard to read your phone screen and send a text to your mom saying, don't worry, all good, got an Uber or whatever. So don't be super freaked out by nystagmus if you see it. It's a normal side effect of MDMA. But sometimes it can get pretty intense to the point where people are having a hard time seeing anything in front of them. Tuesday blues are known as the crash afterwards, where people are bluesing. And I would say this usually kicks in like 2 to 3 days after you roll is when you really are feeling it. And that's why it's called Tuesday blues, is because you'd roll on Friday or Saturday, and by Tuesday you'd be like, Not everyone gets Tuesday blues. Some lucky few get afterglows, where they feel really good and very calm afterwards. And then there's trismus, which is jaw clenching. So the trismus is like the spasms in your jaw, and bruxism is teeth grinding. So trismus is when you will literally just feel like muscle spasms running all the way up and down through your jaw, and bruxism is when you're like, oh man, like my cheeks hurt because I'm grinding my teeth together and I'm biting them without realizing it. Hey. All right, now just to clear something up, again, if you're not familiar with this already, there are 3 primary names for Molly. There's ecstasy, which is often referred to as press pills or pressies, and like these are the easiest to adulterate because you could literally just stamp any damn thing you want into these pills. Someone could be like, that's a popular press, and buy a press kit that looks identical and make something that looks like a really popular press that contains like baby laxatives or whatever they want. I feel like I've said that one before and I find it really fun. I will come back to that comment that you just made about supplement stacks. I have a lot to say on supplement stacks as well, and they might not be what people want to hear, but stick around because that's also super important. Then Molly is usually referred to or referring to like the crystal form of MDMA in a capsule. This is very much just like the slang and what it's usually affiliated with. And MDMA is the actual chemical. It's what people want when they're trying to roll on MDMA. The reason I'm telling you guys this is that a lot of people will assume that if someone is like, oh yeah, I got ecstasy, they'll be like, oh, well, ecstasy is actually just meth and Molly. And it's like, no, ecstasy just refers to a press pill that's supposed to contain MDMA, but may or may not. Like, ecstasy can be referring to anything that contains MDMA. These are all pointing to the same chemical in terms of what you want. That doesn't necessarily mean it's what you're actually getting, but the point is that if you're looking for Molly or ecstasy or MDMA, you're looking for the same experience. It might just be packaged in a different way. If anyone's uncertain of what that means, let me know. Just to be clear, this is MDMA. This is what makes you roll. This is the chemical that we're looking at right now. It's very cute. Looks a little bit like a salamander to me. Can come in the form of a pressed pill or crystals or powder and a capsule. Powder is way more sus than crystal, I think. Unless you're searching for a cathenin. Yeah, hot chewing session with the boys. So, and I know that these numbers don't make sense. I have to go back in and fix them. People were like, oh, why would you do that? And I agree. Honestly, like 2 years later, I agree. It can come in press pill form or capsule form or chunky rock form. Now, I know that a lot of people in here might look at these chunky rocks and make a bunch of like, oh, statements with your monocle on about like, well, that's what that appears to contain to me, and those washes don't look quite good or whatever. Your ass can glean very little information from this photo. Just thank you. Just test your shit. Just what Alexis said. Like, you can look at these rocks and speculate until the moon turns gold, and you're still not going to be able to fully identify the manufacturing process, the impurities, or even what these rocks are. So be aware of that, because even though it's really unlikely, even a rock can be cut. You can just like cut it down or like mash it down, mix some shit in, recrystallize it. If you're really dedicated to fucking someone over, like you can do that. So yeah, just because it's crystal doesn't mean that it's guaranteed, but on the relative risk scale, I would say that probably press pills are the riskiest because you can't even weigh them. It's entirely a guessing game, 100%. Powder is next, then crystal in terms of risk, but they're all risky, test them all. Lots and lots of names for MDMA. These are not even beginning to cover all of them. Rolls, ecstasy, EMD, Molly, Fizz, XTC, as I would say, Pressies, beans. There's tons and tons of names from MDMA. I hope you guys enjoy this GIF as much as I do. I've been hoping that people would like it for a long time, and sometimes they do, and sometimes no one finds it funny, and it devastates me. Usually the come up on Molly is like you are sober, and then maybe in 5 to 15 minutes, your ass is up. Like it is like getting hit with a freight train, honest to God. You will just be going about your business. And my favorite is seeing people that haven't rolled before that are waiting to come up. And they're like, I think I might be feeling it. I think it might be hitting me. And I'm like, oh yeah? Why do you think that? And they're like, well, I don't know, like I feel pretty good. And I'm like, oh, okay, you'll know. And then in a couple of minutes, they sometimes literally like that, because the sensation just kind of washes over you. Your heart rate lightens. If you've done Adderall before, it feels a little bit similar to when you start coming up on Adderall. If there's like a softening in your chest where your heart rate starts to feel a little bit higher and lighter and more dispersed. And oftentimes people will feel really sick or nauseous while they're coming up. Puking on the come up's fine. For anyone that's novel or new to MDMA, naive to MDMA, tell me why I'm getting goosebumps. I know. I know. Anyone that's done Molly can't talk about Molly without feeling an entire body reaction. It's just how it goes. Yeah, a loosening in the bowels. That's another thing, is like people that have done Molly oftentimes will talk about it and then be like, gotta go shit. Sorry, everybody. I'm just putting you through it today. So as you come up, oftentimes it'll be really uncomfortable. And people that haven't done it before and are familiar with the sensation will sometimes be like, yo, I don't like this. I don't like this at all. I want out. I want to come down. Fuck this. I'm done. And you can kind of reassure them if you're with someone, like they are going to level out. They will level out. It's not going to stay the come up forever. And usually it takes no more than like 20 minutes to fully come up. Oftentimes people just have to lie down during that. And Molly's a short experience. It's 3 to 5 hours. At around like the 3.5 hour mark, you're coming down. So we'll talk about redosing in a little bit, because that's kind of a sticky topic as well. Sounds like a meth rush a little bit. Yeah, I mean, like, it's an amphetamine high. Like, you are coming up really, really quickly and really hard, because you have a lot of action happening at once in your serotonin transporters. And we'll come to that in a second. It's a dump. It is literally a dump of neurotransmitters. And then like you don't have any more after a while. And the bouncers have shown up and they're kicking out the MDMA and they're like, all right, kids, go home. Yeah, like the amphetamine class has a lot of similarities. It's just that MDMA is much more entactogenic than something like methamphetamine, which is very much like, I am doing the thing. And Molly is like, we are doing the thing together. And let's touch each other. So you can also snort it. Snorting Molly burns like a motherfucker. And also, if you're snorting a crushed pill, you could be snorting binders, which could really harm your nasal cavities. So please don't snort crushed Pressies. If you must, put them up your asshole. I'm totally serious. Although even that, you're putting binders up your butthole. Like, you should be mindful of what you're putting in your body. And that's why I think press pills are suspicious as hell, personally speaking. My first time trying MDMA was snorting crystals on LSD. Oh, like you were on LSD, not that you put the crystals on a blotter. I was like, that sounds like a recipe to snort a tab by accident and get it stuck in your nose and have to pull it out with tweezers. If you haven't done MDMA before, which I'm sure many of you haven't, MDMA is like, it's known as the love drug for a reason. It's basically an open heart bomb for yourself and for everyone around you. Please mute yourself. If you are not muted, I'm gonna have to come through. Mute. Someone's clicking. Man, you guys are so fast and sneaky. I get to the bottom of the list and you've already muted yourselves. It's amazing. Simply to put this in a frame of reference, as I have not tried MDMA, would the come up feel like an Adderall come up plus a slightly too high microdose? No. The come up is like, it's intense, but you get past it really quickly. And if you're dosing appropriately for your body weight and your body chemistry, you shouldn't be like fucking debilitated. It's normal to throw up. That's fine. Let yourself puke if you need to. But like the come up really is like you become kind of lighter very, very quickly. You feel a rush of lightness go through your body and sometimes a feeling of heaviness and these like electric thrills moving through you. And then oftentimes you have to just like lie down and let it kind of roll through you. Trust that you will plateau and it will be okay. And worst case scenario, if you've not taken enough for your body weight, well, worst case is that you've taken way too much, but we'll cover that later. As a starting dose, you probably are just not taking enough for your body weight if it doesn't go right. That's one of the worst things that can happen, honestly, if you're taking a reasonable dose range, is that you don't take enough. In which case, it feels like you're coming down off of Adderall for 4 hours. That sucks. Sorry. It's uncomfortable. You don't really feel good about a lot of stuff. You feel that kind of like pleasant body roll, but you're not stimulated mentally. And that's what I call not breaking through. Because the breaking through on Molly involves like the open heart bomb. The actual empathy that comes from rolling is the core of the substance. The body orgasmic rolls is just like an added bonus. So these cuddle puddles at raves, you can pretty much bet that probably everyone in them was rolling. Touch is really sensitized. The feeling of like running your fingers through someone's super sweaty hair as you're in a onesie in a cuddle puddle is like really biblical, honestly. And a lot of the time, you'll just be like overflowingly interested in other people's stories. I feel like I'm gonna throw up talking about this. You feel overwhelmingly interested in other people's stories and who they are and what they could be. Your sense of openness to the possibility of other people being good is just like vastly expanded. Everything feels exactly as it should be, which is why the come down can suck so hard, especially if you've taken a lot of MDMA. So usually one of the hallmark effects is intense euphoria and very blissful physical sensations and connectedness, but you can also have a pretty shitty come down or crash, which is definitely worse if you've taken it too frequently or you've taken too much of it. You can also have really serious effects from hyperthermia or hyponatremia, which we'll come back to soon. I know, just wait till we get to the actual rave lecture because we do a whole lecture on raves. Sucks. And then the neutral is you have like an increase in heart rate and blood pressure. The jaw clenching and tooth grinding can be really, really uncomfortable if they're too intense. Right. I know. Mute your mics. Yeah. Now, the biggest danger of rolling, in my humble and medically informed opinion to an extent, is heightened body temperature. This is hyperthermia. Now, hyperthermia is really, 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 really risky on MDMA because your body temperature is already going up from Molly. But if you're in a super hot environment, say a rave or, I don't know, a hot tub with a bunch of champagne with your friends, which unfortunately is like the worst possible place for you to do Molly, then you risk like pressure cooking. It's a lot of heat. And that high of a level of heat in your core temperature, like there's a reason that having a core temperature of 104 degrees or above is life-threatening, 103 degrees or above, and you always should go to the hospital. And it's because you're your internal state is very sensitive. Your pH levels are sensitive, your temperature levels are sensitive. And when you throw that balance, you put yourself at really serious risk of things like seizure and coma and like heart failure and stuff like that. Oh no. Get out of town. So, honestly, like the biggest harm reduction tip that I can give anyone that wants to do Molly is stay cool. And unfortunately, you might find that you roll harder when you're warm. Now, there are a couple reasons why this might be, and I'm not super up to date on exactly what our current understanding is, so I'll kind of get into that territory in a second. Molly dilates the shit out of your pupils, mydriasis, and then also can cause time dilation, although to a lesser extent than psychedelics. You don't really know how much time is passing. Look at the chat. People are not going to accidentally drown from drinking way too much water, but what can happen is hyponatremia, which is basically you have sodium levels in your body that dictate a lot of your cellular activity. The way that, oh, I wish I could get into the chemistry of it, but basically all of your internal bits have a layer of electric charge on them. And sodium is a positively charged ion. Oh my God, tell me. Yeah, Na+. Sodium's a positively charged ion. Thank God I got that right. Yeah, I know. I love this gift. So when you disrupt the sodium levels in your body or the potassium levels or the calcium levels, your little electric lines are no longer in tune with each other, and the balance of water inside and outside of your cells gets disrupted. So if you are drinking a metric shitload of water, you're going to have a too high of a ratio of water to sodium. It gets washed out, which can cause your cells to bloat, basically. If you have too little water in you, that can also fuck you up by causing your cells to shrivel like SpongeBob in the SpongeBob movie, the live action part. So be aware of that. You want to drink a lot of water. You don't want to drink a crazy amount of water. To make MDMA, it used to be that you would use sassafras extract now or saffron oil, but now we primarily use PMK glycidate and other related precursors. And we'll come in a second to some fun facts about PMK glycidate. Man, this is going to take 2 lectures. That's fine. It's worth it. So now on to my favorite bit of MDMA history. Actually, no, before we do this, I want to talk about redosing. I advise that if you absolutely must redose, you should take 1/2 or 1/3 of your original dose 1.5 hours into your roll, no more. The reason for this is that it'll take you probably like 30 to 60 minutes to come up on your second dose. And if you are already rolling and you wait for too long, you'll start coming down before start coming up again. And that not only feels bad, but also sets a psychological precedent that, oh, I start to feel less high, I can take more and come up again. It creates a reinforcing habit. Honestly, I would say that you should probably just avoid redosing altogether. Like really, actually. I think that adding a redose to a roll makes your come down exponentially harder, makes your crash a lot worse. So I would advise honestly just like not doing it, letting it be a short 3 to 5 hour experience, accepting this fact beforehand with your friends, talking about it with your crew and being like, yo, in 3.5 or 4 hours, we might not want to be around each other anymore. We might be irritable or quiet. And that's okay. We can disperse. We can like eat an edible and go to bed. Like that's okay. And set that precedent. And I think that has value in other areas in life as well. Now for some history.
Question.
Yes.
Could you repeat? So 1.5 hours into the roll, what was the percentage of the original dose?
This is just my personal recommendation, is to take no more than 1/3 to 1/2 of your original dose. And the only basis that I have for that, honestly, is like widespread anecdotal. That's it. Oftentimes in clinical trials through MAPS, they use a booster dose of like, sometimes they use, I think 80 milligrams even as a booster dose for 125 or 120 milligram initial start. But I just think that like, if you're taking Molly on a more than once or twice a year basis, you have to actually really start being mindful of how you do it. I guarantee, listen to me now, all of you, I absolutely guarantee if you are rolling more than 2 or 3 times a year, continuously for a long period of time, I absolutely guarantee that after a certain number of years, you will stop being able to roll as effectively. You'll need more, your crashes will get harder, your come downs will get harder, and the magic will diminish. It's going to happen. In some extremely rare cases, like Anne Shulgin could take like 50 milligrams of Molly per weekend for years to help her write. Like some people can get through it. That's an absolute outlier. Everyone that I knew from the rave scene in 2014, by 2016 of doing Molly, even at the so-called conservative dosing of 2 to 3 months as a spacer, could no longer roll. And some people took like 5-year-long breaks and could no longer roll. So I'm telling you this because it's not going to kill you to roll too often, most likely, although it might not feel good. But if you care about this substance being in your life for longer than a couple of years, you had better treat it well because it will catch up to you. That's going out to my rave fam right now. It will catch up to you. So enter Sasha Shulgin. This dude's a fucking legend. Like, if you should know anyone in drug history, it's Sasha Shulgin. That's not true. There are plenty of people that you should know that are not Sasha Shulgin, that aren't older white men. Lots. But he's a legend, yes. Sasha synthesized hundreds of new chemicals in his lab with his wife, Anne, and also tested them himself by doing them at varying dosages, often substances that had never been done or created before. He was just like, I wonder how much this will do, and documented them in his legendary books, Picol and Tikol, Phenethylamines I've Known and Loved, and Tryptamines I've Known and Loved. So 1975, he started to examine its potential uses, and he used to refer to it as like an evening martini, and he really liked it, so he told everyone, his friends, fellow researchers, people in party environments. Now, in the meantime, the psychotherapists and other members of the mental health community had been using this in underground settings for quite a while, and they knew, because they'd been watching the war on drugs unfold, that it was going to get attacked really soon. So they tried to keep it under wraps. They were like, shh, we can't tell everyone about MDMA yet because we don't have enough evidence to support its efficacy in medicine, and we know it's going to get targeted. That did not work. In the late 70s, we had this group called the Boston Group that was making a ton of MDMA in the 70s, and they were primarily using it to supply research efforts. And then it started getting kind of leaked out into party scenes in New York City. And so these groups kind of like split off and formed this additional company called the Texas Group in the late 80s, or sorry, the early 80s. And this was in response to like some people that were manufacturing it noticed what was about to happen. They saw it leak into recreational communities. They saw it get pegged for legislature. And they were like, yo, we should do something about this before it goes completely kaput. So they decided to make a buttload of it. They went to Texas and made a metric ass load of MDMA. So this was the Texas group's doing. I think they made a couple million presses, but I'm not positive. It could have just been hundreds of thousands of presses and then just distributed them. It was getting sold in gas stations, as were most things. Like 2CB was sold as Nexus in gas stations. I think GHB was also sold in gas stations at one point. I'm not positive. Now, during this, you could purchase it over the phone via credit card and it was taxed. Wouldn't be surprised. The 80s, crazy time. So meanwhile, the DEA, dun dun, has entered the picture. They can smell a new substance to demonize on the horizon. And this bitch, this man, John C. Lawn, GHB and gas stations, yeah, was like, okay, we got to criminalize MDMA. And all of these researchers and medical professionals were like, no, this would be a huge mistake. And they submitted, like hundreds of people submitted testimonies being like, you can't do this. This would be a real blow to medicine. And so John C. Lawn was like, I don't like your evidence because it's not concrete enough for me or whatever. So we're going to make it Schedule 1 anyway. Now, there was so much turmoil over this decision that in the upcoming weeks or months, I forget which it was, the court reconvened and reclassified MDMA as a Schedule III drug because they were like, yeah, this is stupid. Like, why would you do this? There's actually no basis for this. And then John C. Long came in a month later and rescheduled it as Schedule I. He vetoed that reschedule and rescheduled it again. Yeah, strongly recommended against a Schedule I scheduling. Okay, let's check out MDMA and Recreation. Let's look at an underground tunnel rave in LA, 1996. Gabber. Now this was the era where MDMA started really getting popularized in rave communities. It was a little bit before that, actually. Oh, man. But before it had the reputation that it does,
as a fully qualified transpersonal
it was used therapeutically.
Psychologist, George Sands, an alias, has conducted ecstasy therapy sessions for over 25 years.
It allows someone to be open to their own emotions. There is a loosening around the judgment that they have about themselves, about what has happened. There's a loosening around the shame. And so there's a room then to engage those memories or the experiences in a very different way.
I am so at peace inside right now that I feel like I'm sleeping. Oh, and I do. I feel like a huge weight has been lifted. Mm-hmm.
The MDMA induces an inner calm that helps patients confront memories and emotions that are too painful to deal with otherwise.
It has to be pure to be able to get this kind of response.
This is inner peace at its best, and outer peace, because I feel great.
During the 1960s and 70s, ecstasy was legally used in alternative therapy sessions, where it earned the nickname penicillin for the soul. But as the rave scene's use of ecstasy flourished, it led to a spate of casualties. Fear of the drug's potential health risks prompted a ban in 1985, despite protests from therapists across the globe. After 4 hours, the MDMA part of the session is over.
I just got the jitters and happiness going on. I feel like the weight of the world is off my shoulders for the first time in ever. Yeah.
The therapy helps Sue to see a way of moving out from under the shadow cast by the loss of her relative.
I couldn't help her, but I can help her kids. And she would thank me for that. Can't bring her back, but I can bring them forward.
Oh, just out here teaching DrugsCo and wanted to cry. And now, oh man, we're gonna really not have enough time to cover everything.
When we add
just a quick thing about MDMA assisted psychotherapy right now, and this is outdated at this point. This is like old news and research. We are plowing through. We are in stage 3 clinical trials for MDMA assisted psychotherapy as treating PTSD. Bam! I just dramatically hit the
when we
space bar.
added MDMA, went up. Pure MDMA, when combined with psychotherapy, has actually been shown in some early clinical trials to be very effective for reducing PTSD symptoms and keeping them away. In this treatment, MDMA is not used as a treatment in and of itself. It's used to enhance the effectiveness of psychotherapy for PTSD. MDMA-assisted psychotherapy is a treatment that happens in a clinic under therapeutic review with trained and licensed therapists, and is very much not a take two and call me in the morning kind of situation. So for example, nobody would ever get a prescription for MDMA to then go fill at a local pharmacy. MDMA-assisted psychotherapy is given in 3 psychotherapy sessions with MDMA over a 10-week course of psychotherapy. So people only take the drug 3 times. In these early clinical trials, 100 participants were treated with either MDMA-assisted psychotherapy or placebo plus psychotherapy. In those trials with placebo, 23% no longer qualified for PTSD after 3 treatments. Now, those are actually pretty good results by clinical trial standards, but When we added MDMA, that 23% went up to 61%. 61% after just 3 sessions no longer had PTSD. Now, they didn't just see their symptoms reduced. These people didn't qualify for a diagnosis of PTSD anymore. Now, with no further treatments, 1 year later, that number went up to 68%. They didn't take the drug again, but kept getting better. Something inside of these people had changed. They tried other treatments. They tried medications. They tried psychotherapy for PTSD, and they hadn't worked for any of these people. And significantly, they had suffered from PTSD for an average of 19 years.
We'll come back to that. Now, in the remaining little chunk of time that we have, just explaining what exactly ecstasy, Molly, MDMA, fizz, beans, rolls, MD, whatever you want to call it, does. So here we have pictured the serotonin neuron. These little sun boys are serotonin. The gist of it is that Molly dumps a bunch of serotonin into your synapse. That's like, if you only want the simplified version, Molly dumps a bunch of serotonin into your synapse. Now, remember that you have a limited quantity made at any given time. Your brain is a little factory. It makes a lot of neurotransmitters. It uses a lot of neurotransmitters. But not all of them get recycled. Some of them get eaten up. Some of them just like aren't repackaged. So you need to be continuously making more. It's not enough to just like pull them back into the presynaptic neuron. Now, it also has some minor activity on dopamine and norepinephrine. Remember, dopamine is your reward neurotransmitter, makes you feel rewarded, responsible for motor control. And then norepinephrine is your fight or flight, your arousal neurotransmitter. And serotonin is your pleasure and mood neurotransmitter, generally speaking. So you can get a pretty good idea of those things working together. You have a pretty substantial action on your mood, your pleasure, socially especially, your feelings of reward around things, and your level of physical stimulation. Now, if this scares you, looking at this diagram, that's fine because I've added Swiper from Dora the Explorer to make it more palatable. So this is the presynaptic neuron. This is the postsynaptic neuron. Here we have the receptors. These are the little the locks. I always get that wrong. The locks that the keys fit into. All these are little keys, neurotransmitters. And these are the vesicles, otherwise known as testicles. The containers, they're not actually known as testicles, just to be clear. The containers which neurotransmitters are stored in. So your serotonin lives in these bubbles. Now, we're going to take a look at MDMA right here, embodied as Swiper, no swiping. Swiper makes its way inside of this neuron and goes around and pokes all of the bubbles so they pop. And it's not actually like that. But Swiper goes in, he sneaks his way in through the serotonin transporter. So it disguises itself as serotonin, like in the elevator, gets sucked in, and then pops all these bubbles so that all the serotonin is dumped out into the synapse. And the reason that it gets dumped out is that normally you have these vacuums that are sucking all of the serotonin out of the synapse, right? Normally, once the serotonin has done its thing, it's bound at a receptor, it's made something happen, it gets sucked back up via vacuums, the transporters, and repackaged. But what MDMA does is sneaky Swiper actually flips that vacuum upside down. So instead of sucking all the serotonin out of the synapse and back into the neuron, it's sucking all the serotonin out of the neuron and into the synapse. It's like in the opposite direction. So now there's a ton of serotonin in the synapse. So it's free to just go ham, like serotonin binding like a motherfucker, like nobody's business. No one can stop it. It's so powerful. Now, after this whole ordeal is over and the transporters have been reversed, the vacuums have been flipped upside down, and Swiper has been kicked out by your bouncers in your brain. Is this excessive metaphors? I've always wondered if it's excessive. Like, you should definitely tell me if you think it's excessive or not. I don't want to lose the plot in here. But after this happens, you've dumped a lot of your serotonin out. You've put your Swiper in the bubbles and popped them and flipped the vacuum, and you've dumped a lot of serotonin. So you're gonna feel not great. I chose this clip art because I just thought that it was like really ugly, and I just want you guys to know that that's why that's in here. So this is what might cause irritability or sadness, And this is pretty common. I would say most of the time, the crash from MDMA manifests itself in the form of not necessarily like hysterical, teary outbursts in the days following your roll, but more like things that might not have irritated you as much will irritate you more, or things that might not have made you tear up might make you tear up. It's kind of like PMSing, but your heart hurts at the same time. And it's also like much worse for a lot of people. So that's usually what it is. Like some people experience massive depressive crashes afterwards, but I would say most of the time it's like, fucking Bob left the goddamn fucking fridge open. I have to do everything myself in this house. And that's kind of how it ends up going instead, I would say. Ooh, just in time for class to almost be over, we hit neurotoxicity. And I'm sure this is the big question that a lot of you that are familiar with MDMA would be asking is, does Molly kill your brain cells? And I love answering this question because it's a complicated one. So neurotoxicity as a concept is basically temporary or permanent damage to neurons, to your brain cells. Neurotoxicity, right? Now, the question of whether MDMA is neurotoxic depends on a couple of factors because like it is a substance, I will say, that is, to our knowledge, capable of inducing neurotoxicity. It's possible, it can happen. However, as I've said before, the context that you use a drug in is what decides how risky it is. It decides what kinds of dangers accompany it and what you can do to prevent or mitigate those dangers. So if you're taking Molly really frequently, in a large quantity, in a hot environment, or with other substances, these are all risk factors that will increase the likelihood of something like neurotoxicity happening. And with that, I'm going to do one more slide. Okay, so this is one theory about why this might happen that clearly I did not fix the animations for. So I'm sorry, that's a sneak peek at what's going to happen in 30 seconds. So the theory that we have working for us right now is that the reason that MDMA toxicity happens is that it's not MDMA itself that's neurotoxic, it's its metabolites. When it passes through your liver, it's gone through this whole meat chopping process and several things are cleaved off of it and it becomes little smaller pieces. And those little smaller pieces can get into your bloodstream and do their own work. And the theory is that those little smaller pieces are what go in and can cause damage or harm. Now, I'll just introduce the concept of MAO really quick. We're going to come back to what MAO is relevant in next time and in times thereafter. So just so you know, there is a thing in your brain called MAO, monoamine oxidase. And this is, you can envision it like a hammer, a bouncer, whatever, that just goes around and smashes up extra neurotransmitters. It's like the trash guru of your brain. It goes around and gobbles them up, breaks them into smaller pieces that can be eaten by antioxidants, stuff like that. It's like it goes around and bullies big things into little things. Now, here's another, because I like to throw all the different variations of neurotransmitter graphics that I can at all of you so you get accustomed. Here's another image of, we have the presynaptic neuron, the postsynaptic neuron. Here are some transporters, here's some MAO, here's some serotonin. Now, so when you break down MDMA, it has these metabolites that could be toxic, right? And some of these metabolites might form free radicals. And with that, we're going to end class because that topic is a little bit too complicated for me to start right as we're ending. So I'm going to stop right there. All right, next time we are going to finish up talking about reactive oxygen species, free radicals, whatever, get into the concept of neurotoxicity and dopamine and hydrogen peroxide and breakdown, and also Dr. Ricart, who is a fucking evil man in drug history. Whew, that's the big scandal right there. We'll talk about supplementation and dosage and like all kinds of stuff coming up on Thursday in DrugsCo. So in the meantime, I'm going to stick around and read through the chat and answer any questions. I'm going to stop recording right now and I will see you guys on Thursday to finish up MDMA. Have a great night.